Hello, everyone, and welcome to a special fireside chat with Lightbridge Corporation. We are coming to you from South by Southwest 2022, and we are thrilled to be here to discuss all things nuclear energy. I'm your moderator. My name is Dr. Sweta Chakraborty, and I wear a bunch of hats, but in this capacity, I'm an independent director at Lightbridge Corporation, and I'm the chair of the ESG committee. I'm very proud to be affiliated with this innovative company, and I'm thrilled to introduce you to my colleagues who are next to me here today. I will start with the president and CEO of Lightbridge Corporation. Under Seth Grae's leadership, Lightbridge is developing nuclear fuel technologies and providing advisory services based on safety, non-proliferation, and transparency for emerging commercial nuclear power programs. Seth, thank you so much for being here. Really excited to get into this with you today.
Such a pleasure to be here, Sweta.
We also have with us Dr. Totemeier, who is the Vice President of Fuel Cycle Technology at Lightbridge Corporation, and he provides strategic planning and technical oversight for Lightbridge's product development and commercialization activities for advanced nuclear fuels. That is complicated on a good day. So I will just refer to you as the nuclear engineer going forward, and I can't wait for you to get into what all of that means.
Excellent.
Thank you for being here.
Thank you, Sweta. I'm looking forward to it.
Yeah, so let's get started. This is a conversation I'm really excited to have for many reasons. One, because nuclear energy is really not understood in the way that it needs to be to really reach its fullest potential. And that's what we as a company are going to really be able to break down here for our audience. So let's start by understanding what made you, Seth, want to pursue nuclear energy technology. Why did you put in all this effort?
Well, we believe that nuclear energy is essential for the world to meet its clean energy and climate goals, and for national security goals that we're seeing now more than ever are important. Specifically, we decided to launch this effort to design for the first time ever from the bottom up just a whole new kind of nuclear fuel that would work in the existing reactors as well as the new smaller ones that are coming. No one had tried to do this before. There are others that are trying to invent whole new kinds of reactors with whole new kinds of fuels, but not new fuels for the existing reactors. And the reason is that the current fuels are just about at their limit. They really can't produce much more power, provide more safety, provide what's needed for the current reactors or the new ones that will be built around the world. And we saw the advancements in metallurgy, we saw other technological advancements that we could draw on and pull together and design a whole new, very advanced technology product that will make the existing reactors and new ones much more economical, even safer, and even have more non-proliferation advantages in what we think is urgently needed for national security, climate, and energy goals.
And you brought up non-proliferation. This is key because the public and many stakeholders that are relevant to seeing nuclear energy reach its fullest potential still tend to conflate nuclear proliferation with nuclear energy. Let's break that down. That's one of the, I think, biggest misconceptions that are out there right now, the biggest challenge that nuclear really faces. And Aaron, I'd love to come to you for this, but please jump in, Seth. What is the difference between the two? How do they relate? And really, how do we make sure that nuclear energy is truly being used for energy and it's a safe outcome?
Yeah, it's an excellent question. And let me say first that Lightbridge is developing fuel for nuclear power for peaceful purposes, right? We are not developing technologies for weapons. And we and others have done studies about our technology which show that if a bad actor were to try to make a weapon from the Lightbridge fuel technology, it would be exceedingly difficult. There's just a much lower amount of weapons usable material and a lower quality of that material in Lightbridge fuel. So we consider our technology to be one of the most proliferation resistant technologies available for nuclear reactors. Now that said, there is no perfect solution to the proliferation question, right?
Sure.
If you have the ability to fission atoms, you have the ability to fission atoms, right? And there are many dedicated individuals around the world who are working to ensure that we don't have proliferation of nuclear weapons while still getting the benefit of peaceful nuclear power. And that may include, folks who work for the IAEA and physically go to sites and measure and monitor where this material is, through a variety of administrative barriers to proliferation. And then there's also technological barriers, kind of like what Lightbridge has incorporated in its technology, which just make the technology less attractive for a bad actor to want to use it as a weapon.
Yeah.
Excellent. Yes, please, Seth.
Well, Sweta, I'll just add that nuclear weapons existed decades before nuclear power did. And the stockpiles of plutonium, of weapons usable materials that were generated in that period before there was nuclear power and then since were not generated at all by the nuclear power industry. These were produced by governments in non-power reactors designed specifically for use in weapons programs. In addition to not making any weapons suitable materials, the Lightbridge fuel can actually be used to eliminate the existing stockpiles of these weapons usable materials, burning them in our fuel to produce new energy, getting rid of those stockpiles of weapons usable materials.
Incredible. And that's something that is just not widely known. So this is why it's so critical to have these conversations and talk about the different advances in the nuclear sector and the real role that it can play. All of these advances are really relevant, but probably more pressing than anything right now is to transition to clean energy. We are seeing what the reliance on fossil fuels means for global security, especially with Russia's invasion of Ukraine. Why is it more critical than ever now to transition to clean energy and break that reliance from fossil fuels?
Well, first of all, if we look at Germany as an example, there are three traits of what people in Germany are seeing in their energy supply. One is that it's some of the dirtiest energy in the world. Two, that it's some of the most expensive energy in the world. And three, that they like to brag so much about how great their energy policy is. And they've gotten where they are by shutting down nuclear reactors and believing that they could get to a renewables-only electric grid. Now, we need renewables. They're essential, but they're not going to provide all the power. There has to be 24/7 power. There's this great belief in Germany and elsewhere that either we will have what's called grid-level battery storage, where we could back up cities overnight or even season to season with power from renewables. But that technology is not here and won't be for a very long time, not soon enough to meet climate goals or for national security reasons. There's also belief in Germany and elsewhere that we'll have carbon capture economically from fossil plants, either at the smokestack or taking carbon out of the atmosphere. But same deal, hasn't happened, isn't near enough. So when we try to rely on all renewables, like Germany was trying to do, we end up burning more coal, and we end up relying more on natural gas and oil from countries that are not friendly for our national security or our allies. And without nuclear in the mix, we are empowering our adversaries, and we are poisoning ourselves and future generations.
And we're supporting petro-dictators around the world. So if there was ever a critical time to make nuclear, that transition bridge to that, having that stable energy, global energy grid, now's the time. So we really need to remember that. We need to transition to clean energy so we don't see more Ukraine-Russia situations in the future. And while we're on the topic of global security, how dangerous is nuclear actually compared to fossil fuels, compared to other energy sources? Should we be concerned about nuclear power plants for global security, regional security, national security? Let's talk a little bit about the actual risk factor of these power plants.
First of all, nuclear power, if you look at the statistics in the history of energy generation, is the safest energy industry in the world.
Wow.
It has hurt the fewest people, it has killed the fewest people for the amount of energy produced. There is nothing like it. Now, when we look at 3 Mile Island, when we look at Chernobyl, when we look at Fukushima, when we look at the lessons learned that have been incorporated and folded into the industry to make it more resilient, more robust, more safe, It is safer now than it ever is. And with even safer new small reactors that are coming, building in all these lessons, and even safer advanced technology fuel that Lightbridge is designing to put in those reactors, this will become even more safe than what is now currently overall the safest energy generating industry in the world.
That is very cool. And I also think something that our global audience may not know. So it's really important to remember that the safety profile of nuclear. So thank you for sharing that. And so Aaron, you're working on SMRs, small modular reactors. Talk to us about the different opportunities and advancements in nuclear right now, and what support is needed to see these reach commercial viability? What can governments do to really realize all of the technology advances within nuclear and really support SMRs going forward?
Yeah, that's a great question. And you're right. The Lightbridge fuel technology works in both our current large power plants and will work in many of those small modular reactors as well as they come online. And I would say in terms of opportunities for nuclear, aside from providing clean, reliable electricity, zero carbon electricity, I think the thing that excites me most is its ability to play a fundamental role in the coming hydrogen economy and transition, right? Electricity use is only a small fraction of our total energy use in the country and globally. And if we're going to move away from fossil fuels, we need some other energy carrier. And I think nuclear can be a way to secure that hydrogen supply and help with that energy transition. Now that said, in terms of what government can do, I would say there's probably three key areas that need to be immediately addressed. First is just the supply chain for these small modular reactors.
Sure. Fuel
Supply, enrichment services, conversion services, high assay LEU fuels. Lightbridge is not the only technology that utilizes high assay LEU. We need a domestic fuel supply and domestic supply chain for the components that will go into these reactors and building them, and the workforce necessary to construct them. Another area that I think will be critical if we're going to have these advanced reactors and small modular reactors come online is to improve efficiencies in our regulatory regime, right? The NRC does a fantastic job. It is the gold standard around the world for nuclear safety, but many of the rules and regulations were written for a very particular type of reactor, a very particular type of fuel, and they don't translate to some of the new technologies that are being designed and developed now. And that will take a lot of time for a new reactor to get through some regulations that maybe don't apply at all, right? And I think the other aspect is that government can do is just further support the conversation amongst the citizens of the nation to let them know the realities about nuclear and the risks associated with not going with nuclear. And that's
right. We have to remember that there's all these perceived risks of nuclear energy, but what are the risks of not having nuclear energy? Let's talk about that.
Yeah, I think Seth touched on a very in his last answer about Germany going away from nuclear now has a dirtier energy system than it did before, right? I think the risk of not having nuclear power means that you either have to put more fossil fuel on the grid to back it up, or we're at South by Southwest. A lot of folks want to see a world where we only have renewable power, right? I would love to see that, but that's not the reality we have today. If we take nuclear power away and try to rely solely on renewables, we're not going to be able to turn the light switch on and actually have lights come on every time we want, right? And we need that reliability.
Americans especially like their heating and cooling.
Yes.
And they're not going to be okay with not having it.
Yeah, something I would like to say on the energy transition globally is that if we're going to meet IPCC climate goals, and if we're going to meet them by 2050, there are sectors that are very difficult to decarbonize. That if we don't decarbonize, we won't meet the goals, even if we decarbonize other sectors. And these very difficult to decarbonize sectors include cement production, steel production, heavy trucks, trains. These are highly CO2 dense industrial processes. And as Aaron said, hydrogen can be essential for decarbonizing these sectors, be it with zero carbon liquid fuels that don't have petroleum in them, that have hydrogen as a base within the fuel, or as what are called hydrogen fuel cells that operate in a chemical process. And only nuclear power can produce hydrogen efficiently enough to compete globally, not just as a product for the rich, but globally to move the needle on energy production and have a hope to decarbonize sectors that if we don't, will not be able to decarbonize. We can produce hydrogen with renewables. It's called green hydrogen, but it costs several times as much as producing hydrogen with fossil fuels now, and that simply is not acceptable for the developing world and many industries. So nuclear really is the only hope in certain sectors until other technologies come along that I think are several decades out after we've either met the IPCC goals or failed.
Aaron, please, any thoughts on that?
No, I think Seth summarized it very perfectly.
No,
Yeah.
fantastic, please.
Just one thing I'd also like to add on nuclear proliferation, at least for me, how I would define it as a baseline in terms of a goal for Lightbridge, which is that uranium is dug out of the ground in massive quantities in many, many countries around the world, virtually unregulated and without any control by the United States government or our allies. And uranium is a very safe material in the ground. Now, with enough processing and a lot of money spent and enough technology, there are countries that have weaponized uranium. So when you look at the Lightbridge fuel, my baseline would be, is it more expensive and harder to make a weapon from this than if someone dug uranium out of the ground? And that's the goal we've gone to, and I believe we've met. That literally it will be so much more expensive, take so much longer, be so much harder, and probably not be feasible at all. But certainly a would-be proliferator would be better off digging uranium out of the ground somewhere. Plus, everything we do will be under international inspections, safeguards, all the usual protections against proliferation. And we're working to make it so it really can't ever be weaponized at all. And as I said, even eliminate the existing stockpiles of weapons-usable materials. But this is very important to Lightbridge, partly because the big, expensive reactors exist in a limited number of countries, and that itself protects us. These countries tend to be very responsible and not want to see any kind of nuclear weapons proliferation. But as we head toward cheaper, smaller reactors that could be deployed in very large numbers, in very large numbers of countries, we might start to lose some of the ability to control what happens in those countries that might not be under the control of the current large, powerful countries that tend to be the suppliers of the current reactors. And we need to have non-proliferation by design. We need to have safety by design. We need to have security by design, so that even if there's a war zone or something else and we lose the current international controls, the technology itself will keep it safe, secure, non-proliferative. And that's what Lightbridge is doing on our fuel design.
That is incredible. That really is. So we are still dealing with pushback despite all of this. And it's known within the industry, but clearly the issue is the industry not communicating. I mean, you're both fantastic communicators, and we are able to have this conversation and share it, but it's not necessarily ubiquitous across the industry. And it's that lack of communication that is resulting in these widespread perceptions of increased risk around nuclear as opposed to all of the benefits. So what can we do as an industry? How do we get more of you? How do we communicate consistently and credibly all of the benefit and potential that can be gleaned for the world? How do we get the industry to do that better?
I think it's an excellent question, but it's also a bit of a difficult one to answer, right? Many people don't want to know where their energy comes from and don't want to have the conversation. The people that do want to maybe sometimes have misunderstanding about the technology or just don't have the time to really get into the technical meat of it, right? Nuclear technology is one of the most complex things humans have ever done, right? You can't really distill it down into a simple slogan that answers people's questions and allays their fears and risks, right?
I mean, engineering is complicated, much less nuclear engineering.
Yeah,
so
exactly. Yeah.
What percentage of the population has studied it and truly gets it? So.
Yeah, it's a difficult conversation to have with folks. Even the folks that do want to know more about it and ask good questions about it, it does take time. I think the industry, insofar as there isn't a global nuclear industry, can do a better job of that just by making resources available for people that are interested in learning the truth about nuclear, the risks about nuclear, and as we touched on, of not having nuclear, right? Engaging the grassroots organizations that are supportive of it and ensuring that they have the right tools to go out and speak to people. Because quite frankly, when I approach someone that has a question about nuclear, they know that I am a trained nuclear engineer, and maybe they don't believe me, right? Because I am a member of the nuclear industry. They think that I have bias, and of course I have bias, but I do try to express, and I think most of us do try to express facts about our technologies that aren't misleading, but again, because it's such a complex topic,
sure.
it's hard for folks sometimes to know who to trust. So I would...
Great point. Seth, please.
Sweta, when I look at countries that have tremendous support for nuclear power, what I see are countries that are very transparent to their public, like the United Arab Emirates, that meet regularly with their public, that answer questions, that invite the public in. There's a lot of this done in France. Frankly, if France had followed the German model, we couldn't hold the alliance together now. And Europe would be so much more dependent on fossil fuels. Instead, France is powered over 70% of its electricity from nuclear and is building more and is a real model for the world. And the United Arab Emirates is adding nuclear power and has tremendous support in the country in a very different political system, but very similarly, very transparent to its public about nuclear power. And what we see in the United States is utilities that have visitor centers at nuclear sites, too many of which have closed in the last several years. But when they do, and they welcome in the public, they have school groups come meet the workers, see the nuclear facilities, understand the safety cultures, understand why it's safe and just how redundant the safety systems are, the public becomes much more accepting. But where we shut the public out and we close them behind gates and we don't answer their questions, they become very fearful. So I think communicating and literally welcoming people into nuclear facilities and explaining what they're looking at is a way to help bring about more public understanding. I don't think people would be as accepting of air travel if they weren't welcomed onto airplanes. And I think we need to welcome people to our facilities.
I like that a lot. So are you seeing that, so you just said some of these programs and facilities have been closed to the public in recent years, but what could we do going forward? How can we engage better with the public? And for you, Aaron, do you know of any education opportunities or efforts that are available to the public that are underway, or maybe that can be ushered in?
Yeah. So I would say, there are fantastic education in universities around the world in nuclear. The United States has arrangements with universities all around, and I think one of the great things in my mind about the nuclear industry is that it is really a global industry. We share knowledge very, very freely with one another, both at the academic level and at the power plant level and the research level. In terms of resources for education, I would point folks to the Nuclear Regulatory Commission website, the American Nuclear Society website, the Nuclear Energy Institute's website. They all have fantastic resources for individuals that want to learn about nuclear, and also for educators that want to, teach their students at varying levels.
Fantastic.
About nuclear technology. So, and that's where I would say is probably the first place to start. There are lots of other smaller organizations and smaller blogs that you can go to, but I think those are some reputable and
Fantastic.
easily accessible.
We love resources here. So you heard that. Credible resources to learn more about nuclear. And it's interesting to get your perspective coming from the nuclear space itself, whereas I come at nuclear energy as a climate change generalist, as a social scientist. I'm a behavioral scientist. And so I think of nuclear as part of the larger climate change conversation. And Seth, you and I have talked about this extensively. And of course, it's very much the ethos of Lightbridge to be more engaged in environment and social issues and governance issues. So let's talk a little bit about nuclear as it in the context of the larger conversation on climate and environment. And as much as we need nuclear to be part of the global energy mix, even larger component of the global energy mix than it is now, of course we all agree on that, inclusion and diversity through the nuclear sector itself is also really important. I know it's important to both of you, and it's very much the ethos of the ESG committee at Lightbridge as well. So we need to think about the environment, and we need to think about the social impact of the nuclear industry and making it not just part of the global diverse energy mix, but have the global diverse population of the world part of the nuclear sector more. So your thoughts on that first, Seth?
I think there was a lost generation in nuclear power. Nuclear was a burgeoning, growing industry until 3 Mile Island and Chernobyl. And then a lot of people decided they didn't want to go into the field. University education programs in nuclear shrank, research facilities at universities in nuclear closed or shrank, and we only now are having a resurgence of people seeing the potential of nuclear power, where nuclear engineering programs are getting harder to get into again. They've always been hard, but even harder. New nuclear facilities are even being built or expanding new facilities. And we tend to have people at retirement age in the industry and relatively early in their careers, and not as many in between. And it's very important, and I know as a focus of the industry, to make sure that the younger people coming into the industry now really are diverse, that without the talents that everybody has to offer, we're not going to be able to bring the technological development that the industry needs. And that's certainly something we strive for in Lightbridge. We've done some work in the United Arab Emirates. One of the things we've seen there that's really heartening is how many women are in the program, how many young women are getting amazing technological training and seizing leadership roles. And without them, the program wouldn't be of the world-leading quality it is, because you really need the talents of everybody. And the older generation in nuclear, frankly, is mostly white men, a lot of whom came from the military in the US Navy program or other programs in the military, and then entered the industry. And the newer people are much more diverse, much more needed, and frankly, a lot more international in their thinking too, which is very important in this industry, and a lot more sensitive to environment and related issues, including social governance, social justice. And one of the things that's hurt nuclear is being tone deaf. So we talk a lot, in the world or in the United States, when we talk about nuclear, what about Yucca Mountain? Why was it never finished? Why did we never put any of the used nuclear fuel there? And part of the reason was there was this effort by some people in the industry and especially in Congress to say, well, we had to only look at Nevada and not at other places in the United States until a decision was first made on putting it in Nevada. Now that got the people in Nevada all concerned, saying, why are you putting it all here? What about other states? Why aren't you considering other states? In other countries, what we're seeing is competition for where to put it, where different sites want the billions of dollars of spending, the jobs, the infrastructure that comes with it. They know it's safe, they want it. So now we're going to something called consent-based siting in the United States, where it's only with the consent of the community that it will be considered. And this is something that really younger generations, newer thinking are bringing in, that's working in other countries, and I think will work well here. And I think that diversity of opinions, bringing in the interests of the public, not acting like, oh, we're the experts, we'll tell you what the answer is, really is serving our industry well. And it's part of why we're seeing places around the world starting to say, hey, we want those small modular reactors being developed in the United States. Hey, we're interested in hearing about that advanced fuel. And they're very interested in the messaging coming from people that they think they can relate to a lot more. No offense to some of the great other people who work at Lightbridge, but I notice in some of the younger, more international way of thinking people that they're a little more effective sometimes.
Well, we'll make sure nobody at Lightbridge that doesn't fall into that category hears that part of the conversation. Thank you so much for sharing that, Seth. And Aaron, why is inclusion so critical? I mean, it's not just a feel-good thing, it's actually necessary. We need to make sure that we have a diverse working force in this sector so we can really realize some of these innovations to their fullest potential. Diversity brings with it innovation and different perspectives. So talk a little bit about why it's important to you.
I mean, I come from a diverse background. I know firsthand that we are better together than we are apart. And finding that common ground and common language and common drive is, it takes work for people to do that, but when you put that work in, you end up better off than when you started, right? I can't speak quite as eloquently as Seth does on it, but there is no place where diversity, a more diverse group can't be better than a less diverse group, and nuclear power is just one of those many areas.
Awesome.
I'd add that in addition to Aaron's great talents that he brings to the company, one of his skills is attracting other great people to the company. And I really notice in many of the younger, brilliant people, much more of a networking skill, that really helps the company, that really helps the industry, that people, when they come to a company, particularly younger people that Aaron recruits, they don't just want to know about your technology, they want to know about ESG.
Right.
They want to know about whether you're a good corporate citizen. They want to be able to tell their family and friends that they're proud of what they do. And that's very important. Mm-hmm.
And Lightbridge is really leading the nuclear sector on this, the leadership in ESG. And there's other things to be proud of at Lightbridge too that's really unique. Tell us a little bit about that.
Well, I think that one of the things that I won't say necessarily is unique, because I want to give credit to other nuclear companies too, is the focus on the combination of benefits of the technology, the economic benefits, the safety benefits, the non-proliferation benefits, the eliminating existing nuclear materials benefits. But something that I will say is unique to Lightbridge is that actually in a world with not that many pure nuclear technology publicly traded companies, as far as we could tell, we're the only publicly traded company on a major stock exchange in the world, in our case the NASDAQ in New York, that only is in nuclear power. There are other publicly traded only nuclear companies that are in mining, that's not nuclear technology, or developing centrifuges to process uranium, that's not nuclear technology. And there are other big publicly traded companies that are in nuclear technology, but they're also in fossil fuels and different things. But it's very interesting to us that as far as we could tell in the world, to be the only pure nuclear company working in nuclear technology on a major stock exchange.
That's incredible. So with that, I will say thank you very much, gentlemen, for this really incredible conversation on all things nuclear, the great work that Lightbridge is doing, and really our hopes for the future, how we're going to lead the sector in ESG and beyond, because nuclear is a solution, part of a much bigger landscape on the climate crisis, and is integral for us to overcome that. and we know that together we are the solution. So thank you, viewers, for joining this conversation, and please continue to engage with Lightbridge through the app and beyond, and keep an eye out for what's to come. We're really excited. Thank you for sharing.
Thank you,
Sweta.
Sweta.